Do you want to learn how to deploy a scalable API so that your front end and your back end can work together? Well, in this video, that's exactly what we're going to teach you. Hi guys, my name's Sam with Complete Coding, and in this video we're going to be learning how to create an API using AWS Lambda and API Gateway, and then deploying it all using Serverless. So what we're going to do is jump into the code, see where we're up to in this course, and then carry on from there. So to create this API, we're first going to start by creating a Lambdas folder in here. So create a new folder and call it Lambdas. And inside here, we're going to create a new file, and this file is going to be called getuser.js. Inside this file, we need to start creating our Lambda function. The first thing we need to do is have a line that exports that function. So for us, it's going to be exports.handler, and this is going to be an async event where we are passing in an event, and that is our function. The first thing we're going to do is console log out the event that is passed in. So console.log event of event. So what this API is going to be doing is looking in a set of data for some user data. So to start with, we're going to be creating that user data. I'm just going to copy and paste this in. So there we go. So this data has some IDs which reference an object which has a name, age, and a job. So our logic is going to be, first we need to get the path parameter of ID, which we passed up by whoever is making the request. If there isn't one, then we need to make sure that we aren't proceeding. So if there is not an event.path parameters, or if there's not an ID on that object, so or not an event.pathParameters.id. So in this case, we're just going to put a comment in here for now saying failed without an ID. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the ID off the path parameters. So let ID equal event.pathParameters.id. Now we're going to look and check if that ID exists in this data object. We can do that by doing if data square brackets ID. So if we used an ID of 1234, it would go data.1234, that exists, that's perfect, and we'll go into here. So in here we need to return the data. If it hasn't got that ID inside data, we need to say that it's failed as ID was not in the data. So this is pretty good as an outline, putting comments where we can't yet write the code. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a common API responses tool, which will help make the responses sent back from this Lambda much easier. To do that, we're going to open up Lambdas and a new file in here called API_responses.js, and in here we are going to just make an object called responses. Const responses is an object. So there are a couple of different kinds of requests, and this can be expanded out. But to start with, we're going to be returning two different types, either a 200 or a 400 request. So for a 200, we're going to be expecting to receive some data, but if they don't pass anything up, we'll just use an empty object. So if they call this 200, we want to return an object, and on this object it needs to have some certain things so the API gateway will be happy. It needs to have headers, which is an object with a content dash type, and this content type needs to be application JSON / JSON. As well as that, we need to have an access control allow methods and a access control allow origin, which are like that. As well as that, we need to have a status code. In this case, we want to be sending back a 200, as that is what the function defines. And we need to pass back a body as well. So we can't just pass back the data because API Gateway won't accept it like that. So what we need to do is stringify that data. So JSON.stringify, and we are stringifying the data. So this means if we call this function, we'll get all of these headers, the status codes, and this is the response we need to send back to API Gateway. What we can do is we can now copy this and do a couple of changes for a 400 status code. The only thing we actually need to change is the name of the method and the status code. At the bottom of the file, we need to now export this. We can do that using module.exports, and that equals the responses object. Save this file, and now we can go back into our get users. At the top of this file, we can now require in our original API response file, such like this: const responses equals require, and we're going to be requiring /API responses. We can now use it in here, so we can return responses._400, which is a failure, and the object we're going to pass in is a message of missing the ID from the path. So that will be sent back if there isn't an ID or a path parameter. If there's data, we need to send back that data. So again, we need to return a response. And this time it's a success, so it's an _200. And the data we need to send back is data _ID. So that's going to send back this object if we entered 1, 2, 3, 4, and this object if we entered 5, 1, 3, 2. The last situation is if there wasn't any data. So again, we need to return a response, again of a 400 this time because it's a failure. And this time we can pass a message of no ID in data. Save all of that, and that is our Lambda complete. What we need to do now is go into our serverless YAML file and configure this so that serverless deploys this API. Inside serverless, we can scroll down to functions, and there's that existing hello function that was created when we first used the template. We can actually delete that and change this, so instead of it being hello, it's going to be get user, and the handler is going to be now lambdas /get getUser.handler. So that is because it's in the Lambdas folder. It's called getUser, and inside the getUser we are exporting a .handler. So that is how that is all created. If we want to make this into an API, we need to make some more adjustments to this file. We need to set an event that is going to trigger this Lambda. We do this by typing events, and we want to have a list of events. The first one is a HTTP event. Inside here we want a path, which is the path at the end of the URL to trigger this exact API. For us, it's going to be get-user / curly braces ID. Where we've done curly braces and an ID, you can use this wherever you want. And then this value, whatever the customer or user enters, is passed in as a path parameter. So here, the ID here matches ID here. As well as that, we need to say which method it is, whether it's a get, post, put, or delete. So for us, the method is simply a get. And the last thing is always say that cause is true if you're ever planning to do this and hit this API from a URL, from a web page, sorry. So if we save this, and what we can do is now deploy this function. So if we open up a terminal, we can now deploy it using SLS deploy, and this will now build our new Lambda and set it up with the event of an API Gateway HTTP event. So this will set up now, and I'll get back to you when that's completed. Now this is finished, we can see that we now have a function of getUser, which is called the myserverless-projects-dev-getUser, but we also have this endpoint here. This endpoint is created with a random set of numbers, and then it's an execute API. It's in US East 1, and then it has at the end our path of getUser/ID. So to test this out, we can right click on this and copy it and head over into a browser. If we open up a new tab, paste in the URL, and then add in our ID of 1234, hit enter, it returns the name of Anna Jones, age 25, and a journalist. This is exactly what we want. So we'll try out some other IDs. What happens if I do 7865? We get a different response this time saying there's no ID in the data. That's because 7865 isn't in the data we provisioned inside our getUser data. So thank you for watching this video where we have learned how we can build an API using AWS Lambda, API Gateway, and then deploying those using Serverless. You can now use this to build your own APIs with whichever data you want. This will help make better front-end applications. In the next video, we're going to be learning how we can modify the serverless setup to make sure that we're deploying everything as efficiently as possible. So make sure that you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that when the next video comes out, you find out about it straight away. And I hope to see you again in that next video.